Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. Welcome to this presentation of selected chamber works by Mexican composer Silvestre Revueltas. The piece you just heard, Canto de guerra de los frentes leales, or in English, War Song of the Loyalist Forces, was completed in February of 1938, just on the heels of a tour of Spain the composer embarked upon throughout the later half of 1937, during the thicket of the Spanish Civil War. It is quite a fitting opener to our program this evening, as it is, in my view, a microcosm that contains several ideas pervading Revueltas' music. First, and most overtly on display, is its demonstration of Revueltas' political ideology and its prominence in his music making. Revueltas was a die-hard leftist for his entire adult life, and that trip to Spain that inspired the piece was in fact an outright political act. Revueltas was a member of Artistas Revolucionarios, or in English, the League of Revolutionary Writers and Artists. I will continue to refer to this group as LIR, per its acronym in Spanish. LIR was an organization of Mexican creatives that advocated for leftist causes such as artistic freedom from government censorship and protesting mass acts of oppression and violence. Revueltas' 1937 journey was actually participation in LIR's tour of Spain during the Spanish Civil War, in which the organization sent Mexican artists to demonstrate solidarity with those resisting Francisco Franco's regime, as well as boost morale. The music of Canto de guerra de los frentes leales draws directly upon this experience. The accompaniments in the low brass and the piano reflect a militant, march-like quality, and the primary melody, heard by the trumpets, is a direct quotation of Si me quieres escribir, a popular anthem of the French Republican soldiers during the Civil War. Second is the length of the piece itself is worthy of discussion. Even with an explicit repeat of over 70% of its notated measures, Canto de guerra de los frentes leales lasts approximately 3.5 minutes. This, at least in part, is most likely born out of the composer's little interest in employing classical European compositional forms, such as sonata allegro form. But a broader survey of his chamber music, particularly those pieces that prominently feature voices and wind instruments, confirm this interesting observation. Revueltas, indeed, often composed in miniatures. The large majority of the pieces that you'll hear this evening are, whether they're observed as individual movements or self-contained pieces, are only several minutes each. And finally, let us take note of the piece's interesting orchestration. One remarkable omission from its instrumentation is the French horn. By the 1930s, the horn was becoming an established member of the typical brass choir or ensemble, and the instrument had long been a staple of the brass section in the orchestra. I mentioned the horn's role in orchestra because the introductory music to the brass ensemble piece is a near verbatim quotation from Revueltas' own tone poem Itinerarios for orchestra, where horns were also at his disposal, yet still omitted. Even more notable, however, though, is Revueltas' inclusion of the piano with brass ensemble, which is uncommon even in contemporary writing for brass ensembles. These interesting choices in instrumentation show a sensitivity to tone color in Revueltas' compositional choices, which we will continue to see reflected through other selections on the program. Our next piece provides an example of these themes of political messaging, short durations, and inventive orchestration at work in the composer's music. While doing so, it highlights a more specific political concept that regularly emerges when surveying the compositional body of Revueltas' work, a promotion of Mexican nationalism. El Alfilador, translated as the knife sharpener, refers to an itinerant tradesman common in traditional Mexican culture, a figure who would travel about towns or entire countrysides, blowing on his panpiped whistle to announce the availability of his services, which you can see above. Revueltas' piece programmatically depicts this knife sharpener character. You'll hear the spinning stone wheel, which you can see in the other photo, upon which he sharpens the blades, in the ostinato provided by the clarinets and the bassoons. And the main melody heard in the English horn and the flute allude to the declamatory whistle that he uses to draw attention of the potential customers. Notably, this piece predates the majority of Revueltas' compositions, with the most serious of his compositions being penned in the final decade of his life, beginning in 1930. The piece was originally composed for violin and piano. Revueltas began his musical career as a violinist, and this piece was most likely written to be included in programs for a 1924 tour of Mexico, the first series of professional performances that Silvestre Revueltas undertook after returning from studying at the Chicago Musical College, today part of Roosevelt University. Although the general style of the piece is not representative of much of his later music, his platforming of Mexican culture through the programmatic nature of this piece predicts two elements that would be synonymous with his work: pride in his nationality and representing the common life of members of the proletariat. Furthermore, the composer's wind instruments choice in his orchestration is already novel here. Instead of the traditional wind octet made up of pairs of oboes, bassoons, clarinets, and horns, Revueltas scores the piece for wind septet, leaving only the pair of horns untouched. He replaces the oboe pair with a flute and English horn, substitutes one of the soprano clarinets for its bass cousin, and goes with only a single bassoon. It was in the late 1920s that Revueltas reworked the violin piano version into the wind septet arrangement that you'll hear this evening. Although it's impossible to confirm, Revueltas scholar Roberto Cole speculates that the composer likely reworked the music in order to be playable by both vaudeville and silent film orchestras that Revueltas led in San Antonio, Texas, and Mobile, Alabama, respectively. Thus, our rendition tonight may not be the US premiere, but this is likely the first performance of the piece in the United States in over 90 years. Currently, the critical edition published by the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico is not widely available in the United States or distributed by US publishing houses. So we hope that our performance tonight brings much needed attention to this mysterious and colorful work. influence of literature on Revueltas' work is also significant. As was previously mentioned, he was a member of Lear throughout the later half of the 1930s, and during that period, he often traded artistic and political ideas with writers, regularly observing how such themes arose in the written word. Furthermore, Revueltas himself was a prolific writer, leaving behind hundreds of pages of manuscripts of essays, letters, and autobiographical sketches. Several of these collections of letters and short autobiographies venture into literary territory, both in their scope and the political nature, poetic nature of their use of language. This interest in the written word and its concurrent influence on his musical creative process is on prominent display in the next two works of our program. The first of these pieces, Tres Sonetos, shows this influence uniquely in that the competition appears to be an oral backdrop against which the poems are to be read. Although both the published parts and the surviving manuscripts of the piece do not provide any explicit indication of this, the sparse nature of the musical activity, as well as the liberal use of softer dynamic markings throughout the score, provide compelling evidence for interpreting a presentation of the work in this manner. Furthermore, musicologist Otto Meyer-Serra cites in his research that he found Revueltas referred to this work as 3 sonnets by Carlos Pellicer, sound by Revueltas, thus providing another allusion to the verses being narrated while the music reflects moments in the poetry. Tres Sonetos was written very quickly during one of Revueltas' manic spurts of creativity. According to the dates on the manuscript, the composer wrote 1 movement per day over a 3-day period in February of 1938, placing the piece in the same busy period of composition as Canto de guerra de los frentes, leales. Each of these movements portrays a somber character that reflects the serious subject matter found in the poetry. The poems in question here are originally found in Carlos Pellicer's Hora de Junio, which Revueltas read upon his return to Mexico from Spain, whereupon he asked Pellicer to lend him some of his writing. Moreover, the restrained employment of melodic material that connects longer studies and sustained harmonies provides a marked departure from his usual chamber music writing that often reflects a sense of rhythmic vitality and melodic verve. Nevertheless, Revueltas' choices in tone colors continue to draw attention in these miniatures. The timbral palette he chooses is quite unique, be it the melodic dialogue between the tuba and the horn that closes the first sonnet, or the constant flow of the piano and horn that accompanies the pulse of brass and woodwind block chords in the final sonnet.
Vuelvo a ti, soledad, agua vacía, agua de mis imágenes tan muerta, nube de mis palabras tan desierta, noche de la indecible poesía. Por ti la misma sangre, tuya y mía, corre el alma de nadie siempre abierta. Por ti la angustia es sombra de la puerta, que no se abre ni de noche ni de día. Sigo la infancia en depresión, y el juego que alterna muertes y resurrecciones. De una imagen a otra vive ciego. Claman el viento, el sol, el mar del viaje. Yo devoro mis Era mi corazón piedra de río, que sin saber por qué daba un remanso. Era el niño del agua, era el descanso de hojas y nubes y brillante frío. Alguien algo movió y se alzó el río. Lástima de aquel hondo ciego remanso, y la piedra lavada, y el remanso liándose de sombras de esplendor sombrío. Para mirar el cielo, qué trabajos pueden los ojos turbios siempre bajos. ¿Serán estrellas o huellas de estrellas? Era mi corazón piedra de río, una de aquellas cosas de un imposible tuyo y mío.
In the next selection, Caminando, we continue to see Revueltas using his music to communicate a political ideology sympathetic to the civil struggles of common people. The text is supplied by Nicolas Guillen, a Cuban poet whose work also inspired Revueltas' most famous piece, the orchestral tone poem Sentimaya. Guillen's verses portray an unemployed worker suffering through a seemingly infinite spell of poverty and physical anguish. Platforming the harrowing experience of the protagonist suffering the negative effects of capitalism is a strong political statement alone. However, Revueltas' manipulation of the musical material to reinforce the poem's drama helps heighten the political impact of the composition. The continuous ostinato provided by the percussion and double bass provide a backdrop of continuous walking that the protagonist is forced to endure. Meanwhile, the treble melodic instruments provide regular interjections. These exclamations symbolize the protagonist's pain and suffering through their disjointed rhythmic entrances and their continuous unwillingness to unwind harmonies consonant with the piece's near ubiquitous concert pedal tone. The tension between these two sonic elements regularly supplies the music with subtle yet uncomfortable feelings, despite its ostensibly upbeat vibe. Rhythmic intricacies that often figure into Revueltas' mature musical style are on display in this piece, as the composer incorporates rhythmic cells common in Afro-Cuban idioms, such as the son, the montuno, and the tercio. On a deep level within the piece, Revueltas' complex manipulations of these specific rhythmic figures and their myriad permutations, can be viewed as Revueltas affirming the plight of underserved demographics. In her 2016 dissertation concerning the interplay of political and musical content in several of Revueltas' chamber pieces, Elsie Gallardo Diaz wonderfully articulates the connection between the composer's use of rhythm and the poem's political message. Quote, "The Cuban son carries very specific connotations of social and economic status, race and culture, geographic location, and politics. Before its commercialization, the Cuban son was inextricably linked to the lowest classes, the blacks and mulattoes of Cuba, and their neighborhoods. And thus, to many, it evoked images of poverty, illiteracy, prostitution, lack of decorum and sophistication, as well as violence, racial discrimination, and institutionalized oppression. By assimilating, transforming, and reinterpreting stylistic elements of the Cuban song complex in Caminando, Revueltas clearly identifies its characters in the cultural space in which they move, the oppressed and the unemployed blacks and mulattoes of Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean. As a brief final note, Revueltas' choices in instrumentation for this short piece are still interesting. Pairs of trumpets and clarinets accompany low reeds of bass clarinet and bassoon, scored in such a way that the piece could conceivably be performed without vocalists. This, however, would come at the expense of omitting the political power of Guillen's poem. These instruments are joined by double bass and auxiliary percussion, as you can see. And while not exact, this orchestration resembles the conjunto, an archetypical musical ensemble pervasive in both Mexican and Cuban musical cultures. Throughout the evening, we've observed how Revueltas' compositional craft is innately intertwined with his political leanings, how his pieces for chamber ensembles are often pithy or even terse with regard to their length, and moreover, how this cross-section of Revueltas' compositional input, in particular, displays his unique and novel sensibility for tone color. While these are worthwhile findings to bring to a wider audience such as you all this evening, I have barely scratched the surface in exposing the value of Revueltas' music. In particular, I would like to prompt other leaders of wind ensembles to tap into this fruitful well of musical inquiry. Scholars such as Roberto Kolb, Elsie Gallardo-Diaz, Peter Garland, and others have certainly conducted much great research on Revueltas and his musical significance at large. Still, Revueltas' music is currently conspicuously absent from programming trends in large swaths of the American wind band practice. Whether it be exploring the use of chamber winds as accompaniment for vocalists in Revueltas' work, or even researching works for wind ensembles by Revueltas' teacher and early advocate, Carlos Chavez, as well as his younger contemporary, Blas Galindo, I believe there's further room for exploration in this research domain with which I intend to continue, while also inviting my colleagues to join me. At the very least, conductors of wind groups should work to include Revueltas' music more on their programs. Much of this music is certainly accessible to collegiate ensembles, and some of it is even attainable for quality high school programs. In either case, these works can and should be embedded in our literature. There is certainly interest in this idea, as evidenced performances by the University of Hawaii, Texas State University, and Oklahoma City University that are readily available on YouTube. Nevertheless, we as a field can look to Revueltas' music as a whole and as a largely untapped resource, particularly in our current moment when there is a broad and strong cultural mandate to uplift the voices of composers who represent demographics traditionally underrepresented in professional and academic circles of Western art music. To aid those interested in this effort, I would highly recommend Brian Carey Sparks' 2003 dissertation that discusses the wind music of Silvestre Revueltas. It is a document that seems to have gone largely overlooked and would greatly help those who want to begin pursuing some of these aforementioned initiatives. There is perhaps no other piece that better demonstrates the untapped wealth of all of these ideas than the Homenaje a Federico García Lorca, where Revueltas' prowess is on full display. The composer's pride in his Mexican nationalism is readily apparent in his synthesis of mariachi stylings and his own compositional voice, a combination which allows him to craft music that is at once Mexican, yet never contains extraneous musical quotations. Uniquely intertwined with the political connotations of the piece are the obvious references to literature. The piece is a literal homage to García Lorca, a brilliant Spanish poet and playwright who was assassinated by the nationalist forces at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. And still here, the music showcases Revueltas' skills and inventiveness as a colorist through his unique orchestration choices. Strident tones of piccolo and E-flat clarinet are the only woodwinds employed, and the prominent use of mutes in both the trumpets and the trombones lend piercing, nasally qualities to musical statements. While Sensei Maya is perhaps Revueltas' most well-known piece, the Homenaje a Federico García Lorca is certainly the crown jewel of his chamber music, and as musicologist Peter Garland asserts, perhaps the greatest work in Revueltas' entire oeuvre. Before we perform this final selection tonight, I would be remiss without extending various thank yous. First, a thank you to all my teachers here at Ithaca College, who have helped me grow so much during my time pursuing this master's degree. I would like to mention in particular Grant Cooper, who's been my major professor for the past 2 years, and I would especially like to thank Dr. Rebecca Daniel, who's been extremely wonderful to work with since Ithaca College Band's alumni event over the summer, celebrating 100 years of the Ithaca College Band program. Dr. Daniel enthusiastically encouraged me to pursue this lecture topic when I pitched multiple ideas to her, and working with her this fall semester has already been extremely fruitful in my development as an ensemble leader. A special mention also goes to the preeminent Revueltas scholar, Roberto Kolb of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. He generously shared his expertise with me throughout the past handful of months, as well as many documents that helped in preparing these performances and background of Revueltas' work more generally. A thank you to my family, who are always supportive of my endeavors, such as my parents who traveled all the way from Wisconsin to be here for this event this evening, and a especially big thank you to my lovely wife, Tori, who is eternally supportive and never ceases to ground me in what's important in both work and life. Even though the semester has been particularly stressful due to a variety of factors, buying a house, living in separate corners of the country, etc., having you as a partner in life is a true blessing. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, a huge thank you goes to all of these musicians, both on stage and off stage. Conductors can do little without wonderful people with whom they can collaborate, and I'm extremely fortunate to work with so many fine musicians here at the IC School of Music, Theater, and Dance, all of whom tonight bring their talent simply out of the kindness of their own hearts and a desire to make great music with one another. Please give them a round of applause. And so, without too much further ado, we give you the Homenaje a Federico García Lorca.